what I'm going to talk to you about today is new construction placement. And what do I mean by new construction placement? Well, I'm going to speak to housing mostly. Obviously, this is the First Nation Housing Conference, but this applies generally to any building that's being constructed. Small, big, these are the things that you want to consider when you're putting it in a lot, or where you're putting it, how you're orientating it in a lot, and how it's being built. So, choosing a lot location. In Ontario, there is a lot of different land. In Southern Ontario, you get the rolling topography, the hills, it has really good soil. As you move further north, it starts to look like this in the bush. So you get coniferous trees, there's a pine base, it gets more silt and clay soils. When you get way up north, it's pretty much just all trees, and then it obviously gets more barren if you go really, really far. This is a picture in Kenora. It's a pretty nice picture, but you can see one of the main obstacles when choosing a lot location is bedrock. You have to be beware of where it is and how to get around it. Generally, it's best just to avoid it, but I'll touch on that later. So I use Google SketchUp. It's kind of a really cool free program that any one of you guys can download and play around with. It's basically a building model design. It's like AutoCAD, just a little simpler. And I created this house and to go throughout this demonstration. And basically this house is to represent, if you go to Beaver Lumber, like whoever you get your building materials from, and you say, I want a 2-bedroom, 1-bath, cheap, you know, I want to keep the cost down, this is the house that you will get. So it's got a deck there, you can see the front door, this is the back of it, and then this is the layout. So you can see 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, and then the kitchen would go on either side, there or there, it really doesn't matter. But just for the purposes of our presentation, this is our cute little house. So choosing a lot. The things that you need to ask, it seems that everybody is concerned with the building, right? And rightfully so, it's the main part, but you need to consider how it's orientated on the lot. So one of the biggest things, especially in the north, when you're paying like so much money for hydro, where is south? Heating your house costs so much, and passive solar gains, you're gonna gain so much. Before you build, you need to, if you have a septic field, you need to know where that's gonna go. So generally septic fields, you don't want them in high traffic areas, but I'll touch on that again later. Water management, drainage. It rains here a lot sometimes, and you do not want your crawl space or house to flood. Are there current and water and wastewater servicing? So oftentimes when you go to put a house on a lot, there will be water, wastewater services existing, and you kind of have to go to those services, but I'll get on that later. Does a well need to be drilled? Is there any planning and housing policy that needs to be followed? And house replacements, so when a house is demolished and replacing that. So the first thing, this is kind of my little hypothetical lot, right? And right in this area, you have your neighbors, they have pretty nice houses. And so what I want to demonstrate here is on this next slide, what I've done is I've turned shadows on. So what I want to pay attention to is this is in January. So when you care about where the sun is in the winter. And a lot of you probably know this. In the summer, the sun rises and sets kind of above your head. Whereas in the winter, it just sits on the edge line. And that's key for solar gains. And I'll show you what I mean in a second here. So what I did was I took the top off of our house and watch the shadow and I want you to pay attention particularly to the window shadows. So you can see them there, and there. Just there's no roof, so there's obviously going to be a little bit of shadow. But this is how the sun moves in Kenora at 7, 10, 12 p.m. and 2 p.m. So just pay attention to the shadows. So you can see this is actually just because there's no roof, but like this room is getting lots of light. There isn't much light getting in there, a little bit there. And then as you move throughout the day, you can see that this house really isn't getting that much light. And why is that? It's because the south wall is this wall here, and there isn't much glazing or windows on that south wall. And like the thing with housing construction is the building code states you have to have windows in bedrooms. There's a certain amount of windows every house has to have. And if you're gonna have those windows, you want them on the south wall. Like it's a no-brainer. It's the only way you'll make them more efficient, because windows, they lose heat in the winter, and to try to make up for that, you want them pointing south. So now watch as I turn the house. Okay. So now watch as I turn the house towards south. I want you to pay attention to these shadows here. And it does a pretty good description of why you want it orientated south. So now look at that. This is 12 p.m. orientated south, and there's a lot more light. You're gonna save energy, and I'm gonna go through the same times as I did before. So 7 a.m., 10 a.m., 12 p.m. And again, I want you to pay attention to this room, the main living space, and with the two biggest windows, and just look at how much more light they get. Now you might be asking, like, okay, that's all fine and dandy, but like, what are the facts behind it? So there's this cool site, susdesign.com. They have a few calculators that you can put in, and one of them is window heat gain. So this map that I'm about to show you, I'll just go to the next one because this one's kind of small. So this is if the window is on the west wall. So this is the time from 4 p.m. till 8 p.m. at the top, and then you have your months from January to December, and this is the amount of heat that the window is making. So you can see that this heat spot here, in the afternoon, because the sun's on the west wall, in the summer, it'll get, or sorry, not in the summer, but sorry. In the summer, it will get all of its heat, which is really what you don't want. You don't want your house heating up in the summer. You want it to be cool. So in comparison, I will show you what it's like on the north wall. There is nothing. All year round, your window on the north wall isn't gaining you any heat. All it's doing is escaping heat in the winter. So this is the south. So the main differences here is that's April to January, and this is, so there's a little bit of August, but this is September to December. So what you're seeing is they're gaining heat. So where's the highest month here? 27,000, that's BTUs per hour per square foot for the month of February. So to put that in perspective, BTUs are a measure of heat. So when you buy a barbecue, you usually get like 10,000 BTUs. So it doesn't seem like that much heat because, well, my barbecue makes 10,000, but it also heats up to 400 degrees Fahrenheit. So I'm just trying to get my point across where, above all things, like, there's going to be some things and some opportunities where when you put a house in a lot, you're not going to be able to put it south. That might happen. But you can change the layout of the house, you can change the direction, and it just makes sense from a sustainable point and to save the tenant energy that you want it facing south. So now I'm going to get into septic fields. So this is our little lot here, and we have it in the house with the windows facing south. And so, like, where would you want your driveway? I just didn't have time to change the entryway to the steps on that side. So basically, the driveway is just right off the street. Really, they probably wouldn't park there. They would probably park over here. It makes more sense. They drive up, park the car there, walk right in the house. So where would you want your septic field? Well, you wouldn't want it here because the main reason is, well, people could park there. And if someone parks on your septic field, there's a very good chance that they're going to destroy it. Would you want it over here? Well, no, people could come in their sleds, ATVs, whatever, and it's just generally a good area to have open. So where I would put it in this house is in the back. There's building code regulations that say it has to be so far away from the house. I couldn't find them right away, but you generally want the septic field in a place that's going to be non-trafficked by people and where you can use mechanical advantage, so it's sloped down from the house. Right here, it doesn't show it being sloped, but basically you would want this ground to be sloped down. Okay, so water management and lot drainage. Okay, so soil types. So yeah, if you do have clay, you just kind of have to deal with it. You could bring in material, but it's not worth the money. Gravel, if you ever see this existing anywhere, you should probably open a mine and not build construction on it. To be honest, you'll make a lot more money. Okay, so overall, a topography. And what I mean by that is, how does the ground look? So the features that you want to avoid is bedrock appearances throughout the lot. And so what do I mean by that is, if you have bedrock kind of popping up everywhere, chances are that you dig down 6 to 12 inches, you're going to find more bedrock. So you generally want to steer away from that, because then that would mean, in order to get the water drainage you want, you have to bring fill in, which costs more money. Large holes with extreme slopes. So why would you want to avoid these? Well, they create erosion. So when it rains, all the water gets rushed into these large holes, and it's going to erode, and it could eventually reach your house where it becomes a safety hazard. Extreme slopes and ridge lines is pretty much the same reason for large holes with extreme slopes. If you put your house on the bottom of a really big hill, all the water rushes down it, and it ends up in your backyard or your basement. Big rock faces, obviously they're really hard to build on. Some people do it with pipe drilling and drilling, but it's a lot more expensive. And signs of erosion from weathering. So this is a pretty big one. If you see signs of erosion, which I'll touch on later, you just want to steer clear, or you have to put in some kind of mechanical system to help it. And then completely bare lots with no vegetation, which I'll touch on again later. So overall topography. So I kind of, again in SketchUp, made our little lot here. You can see there's some ups, there's some downs, we got some trees. It's a pretty lot in between these little cookie cutter houses here. And so what's good about this lot? Well, it has hills, which is pretty good, because when you build a house, you're going to have to level those trees and level it out anyways. And when you build a house and you look at the plans, it has the word undisturbed earth or undisturbed soil, which basically means when you bring soil in, you have to compact it because it'll consolidate and settle. So you kind of save time by being able to cut this off and accessing the undisturbed earth, and then you can bring your gravel and compact it to build your foundation on. So this is what you would want to avoid. Basically, a big crater, there's extreme slopes. If there was bedrock in there, you wouldn't want it. And then this is what I would call, it's pretty ideal if we were going to place, yeah? How long a day to consolidate? So if you're bringing soil in or if you're excavating it? So what you would do then is you would want to compact it. So if you're bringing sand or gravel in, you need to get a compactor and do it. Otherwise, I'm not sure on the time you would wait. Well, I want to say no, because you want to know that it's compacted when you're building the soil on it. I understand what you mean by if you let it sit a year, but then it might not be level. When you compact it, you know everything's tight and it's all level. So generally you want to avoid just leaving it and letting Mother Nature do its thing. So back to this, this is a pretty ideal lot because there's no really holes here. When you level that down, it's going to be flat, undisturbed soil. Plop the house on the middle, you already have good grading. This, just pretend it's bedrock. That's an example of something that you would want to avoid. For obvious reasons, bedrock is very tough to build on. So green space. What is green space? Does anyone here know what that is? Basically, it's the amount of vegetation you have on your lot. So every time you put a building on a lot, it reduces green space. This is a huge term in cities like Toronto and Vancouver because they want green space to, one, manage water, and two, it looks pretty. But so green space, basically the more vegetation you have, the better. It's pretty straightforward. Mother Nature does a really good job of handling water. When it pours rain and you're walking through a dense forest, like, it doesn't feel like it's pouring rain because the trees stop the water, the bushes stop the water, the ground absorbs it. it's not nearly as bad as if you're running through a parking lot. Concrete, like it just rushes away. It has nowhere to go. You have to give it a place to go. And the house, like your roof on your house is the same thing. You have to give the water somewhere to go, or else it's going to flood. So this is just kind of an example I have to show the importance of green space and how easy it is to just overlook it. So we have our house here. It's on a lot. It's graded pretty well. It's a little steep, but hey, what can you do? Got the south exposure. You know, you got some nice vegetation there. It's looking good. And then the tenant here says, well, I'm going to build a garage. And well, where would he put his garage? Right here, right? So he's got his big 2-door garage effectively blocking his southern exposure, and he's reduced the amount of green space of his lot by about 1/4. So then he says, well, I put my cars in here, and then I need a shed. Like, where am I going to put my snowblower? So then he builds a shed, and he removes all the vegetation. And every time he's doing this, you're reducing the amount that your lot is going to naturally shed the water. So the last thing he does is he says he wants a pool. So then he puts a pool in and a pool shed, and he's basically just packed his lot with stuff. And the water is going to have nowhere to go. What's going to happen? It's probably going to pool here. It's going to pool in between the houses. You'd likely, if there's no slope, it's going to flood there. And then the worst thing that could happen in this case, you generally don't see it on reserves as much as you would in like a city, is if 3 giant houses got put behind him. Then you're pretty much screwed. He's going to have issues. The size of the house. This is, again, related to green space. So the bigger your house is on your lot, the harder it's going to be to manage the water. So we have just our little house here, and then a medium-sized house, and then a mansion. You can just see how hard it is to really manage the water. Spotting signs of erosion. Does anyone know what to look for to spot erosion? Some of them are pretty easy, but you know, after a hard rainfall on a gravel road, you can kind of see where the water has dug out a little trench. It's the exact same thing if it were on a lot. So lines or small marks on the ground after heavy rain. If you see a tree and its roots are completely exposed, there's a good chance that around that tree there's been a lot of erosion, because at one point those were underneath the dirt. Undercutting of slopes and collapsing of slopes. Those are pretty obvious. If you see a slope or ground and it's kind of got a C cut out of it, then it's kind of a recipe for disaster. Don't build a house on the top of the hill. So this is an example of what I was talking about with the gravel road. You can see the water rushes down through it, and this is pretty much a good example too of green space. So if this was all forested or had grass, the chances are that you probably would see it running through, but it wouldn't be going as fast and there wouldn't be as much water. This is a pretty bad sign of erosion. So again, like I said, it's a farmer's field of some sort, right? And it has a little bit of vegetation on it. And obviously there had been a heavy rain and it's completely separated the earth. And it's just again proving the point that you want that vegetation to stay. And then this again is just kind of an example of how easy it is for water to break through from like one level to another. A huge thing with this is when people are building houses and clearing it, like I'm sure it's fun when you're on an excavator or a bulldozer or whatever, but you don't want to go gung-ho. Like you just want to get rid of where you want to put the house, and that's it. When you clear the entire lot, well, you're stepping yourself backwards. You don't want that. Downspouts and extensions. I already mentioned this earlier. Make sure they exist. Everybody likes to take them off. They don't exist, they're not doing you any good. You want them there. So I kind of there's a way that you can orientate them as well. So when they come off your house, right, a downspout, and then it would either come this way, that way, that way, or that way. Could anyone tell me which way you would want this downspout put? Yeah, you would want it towards the sloped ground here. You wouldn't want a downspout over here because it's just going to end up at your house. It's effectively doing nothing. So this is another view of where you would want. It naturally drains off. The ground is naturally sloped that way. And that's probably where you'd want to put it. And same with the other side collection. You would want to have 2 downspouts on that side. Ditch line and culvert location. So when you build a house, make sure there's at least a ditch. Because like I said, again, water management. You want that ditch to exist. If you have a stormwater collection system, that's fantastic because oftentimes you can tie in your eaves troughs and downspouts directly into that management system, and then it completely avoids your lot altogether. Avoid building directly by stormwater systems. They're only designed, I gotta remember this, but for what's called a 10 or a 20-year storm, if anyone can correct me. And what that means is every 10 years, they're not gonna be able to handle the amount of water. So if anyone remembers our winter like 2 years ago when it snowed a bunch and then in the spring everything pretty much flooded, well, it's because the winter was a 50-year winter. It was horrific and we got a lot of snow, so the stormwater system couldn't handle it when it all melted. So you want to avoid building beside them, and that includes ditches. Ditches flood. It will happen if a culvert gets blocked, it'll flood. And replacing damaged culverts. It's a huge thing. When you're building the house, like notice what's around. If the culvert needs to be replaced, get it replaced. Chances are the band's paying for the house. It's worth your while to replace the culvert as well. Water and wastewater services. So most communities, they'll have some kind of water distribution and or water collection systems. So when you're building a house, you want to locate where those are, but you don't necessarily have to adhere to them. So if, let's say you have a replacement house, why was that house destroyed in the first place? What happened to it? Did it burn down? Did water damage, was that a thing? If water damage was a thing, you might want to consider the cost of moving the service lines to benefit the new placement of the house. So I've just kind of like put a quick example here. If the water service line is here and you obviously don't want your house built in that rut, you could easily, like that, you could easily kind of just turn it and then have it come in the house. I couldn't figure out how to get it shaded there, so hopefully everyone can see that. And then well locations. Some people are on wells. Anyone here have wells at their house? Maybe, maybe not. But before you build, same thing with septic fields. If you need the well location and septic field location, you want to decide those before you build the house. There's been a couple times when a house is constructed and then the well gets built. And it's kind of a pain because equipment has to move in. I don't know if you guys have ever seen a well drilling rig. It's a pretty big truck. They have to go down pretty far. Yeah, so basically that's just what I said. Same rules as septic fields. Wells need to be protected. You don't want people running into them. It'll cause a lot of damage and end up costing the band a lot of money. They're expensive and you want them to be protected. Again, housing replacements, I kind of mentioned this earlier, but you just want to ask the questions. Well, why was it destroyed? Was it a user issue? Was it water damage? Did it burn down? Like, was the house 100 years old? Like, I live in a house that was built in 1907, right? So if that house were to fall down tomorrow, well, it's over 100 years old, right? It's an old house. It's kind of expected. But you want to ask those questions. And housing policy. Some communities have policy that would say how far away from the road it would be and exactly where it's going to go, zoning requirements. This is big in cities. I don't know if many First Nations have them, but it's another thing that you need to consider when building it. And I think this is the end of my presentation, so I kind of sped through it too quickly. Oh, yeah. So if there's anything I want to tell you, it's know where south is. That is huge. Knowing where south is when you're building a house is ultimately going to save the tenant money. And any time you can save somebody money, you should probably do it. And be mindful of drainage and green spaces. Like Chris and I, we work together, we go in crawl spaces. When they're rough, so there's mold and water damage, I'm sure people here have been in similar houses. You want to make sure that the house is drainage, or the house is graded correctly, there's proper drainage, and those measures are in place, because housing is not cheap, right? Everybody here knows that. And the way that all these problems start, where they fester from, oh, my crawl space is a little musky. Well, it's probably because it's graded wrong. And determine septic field, well, and servicing lines before construction begins. That one's pretty much a no-brainer, but everybody makes mistakes every once in a while. And is there any questions? Nobody? Yes?
I have a problem because we're right on Highway 11.
Yeah.
We can't ditch anymore along the back of the yard because everything over there is the highway.
Okay.
So how would I?
So let me just try to get this right. So the back of the lots
Right.
are on Highway 11?
Highway 11. And
Yeah.
You're not planning ditching anymore.
Do you have ditches at the front of the lots?
That's the road.
That's,
The paved road.
but like, is the paved road level with the lot?
Somewhere.
Because that would be my next logical step, is I would look at, okay, putting a ditch line in between the houses and the community's road and trying to avoid Highway 11. You could butt heads with MTO, but chances are that there's probably a good reason why they don't want you ditching. Yeah. So that's my opinion, I guess, would be to look at putting a ditch in on the side of the road. Is there any other questions?
Would green space make a difference? Possibly?
Maybe.
That might.
So they don't have back area.
Mm.
Well, you think MTO would be able to put in something similar to a dry well? Like a strip of land that would absorb water, that would be lower than, say, the house foundation? Basically, it's sandy large dry well.
Yeah.
And again, it'd be an option, it would be expensive, but it would solve it, maybe green space. Right, but.
Okay, so there's no more questions. Feel free to ask me later if you have anything that's like personal specific to yourself. If not, I kind of powered through my presentation way too quickly. But yeah, that's it. Thanks. So yeah, go get lunch.